everyone, welcome back to WCB Jazz Vinyl. So next Friday is Black Friday, Record Store Day. And guess what? I received a couple of the titles and I wanted to share my thoughts about one of them in particular today, and that is Bill Evans, Live at the Penthouse, 1966. So before we dive in, as always, please like this video. You can subscribe to my channel, it helps me quite a bit. And if you'd like, you can head over to Instagram and follow me. I'm at what_can_brown. All right, so let's cover some of the nuts and bolts of this release just up front. So again, Bill Evans, Live at the Penthouse, 1966. It's being presented on 180 gram vinyl. It is a gatefold jacket. Features a booklet with some fantastic interviews, including one with Bob James, one with Joe Hunt, the drummer, one with Eddie Gomez, the bassist. Really interesting to be able to capture, I think, some of those perspectives with like modern interviews that are included in the booklet about this this otherwise very old recording. So I think it adds some really great context inside this booklet. The content was recorded by an engineer named Jim Wilkie, who was the sort of house engineer at the Penthouse Jazz Club. The material was transferred from those original master tapes by Matthew Luthans at the Mastering Lab. Feels to me like Resonance is using Matthew Luthans for pretty much every release, and lately anyway, and all of those releases have sounded great. So I think we can kind of expect more of that here. As far as the dates specifically, so 1966, as I mentioned, you kind of have to be careful because the hype sticker gets it wrong. It says 1965, but everywhere else it's 1966. But yeah, recorded at the Penthouse Jazz Club May 12th and May 19th, 1966. And that's going to come in, that's going to be important with some of my later thoughts in terms of placing this in Evans's catalog. So I'll kind of explain that as we go. As far as the lineup, I know I mentioned Joe Hunt, drummer, Eddie Gomez, bassist, right, that are joining Bill Evans. And a couple of interesting points I think about this lineup. Firstly, Gomez had just joined the Bill Evans trio in 1966. Previously, he had played with Giuseppe Logan on ESP Disc. I want to say a couple of ESP Disc titles. But this was the earliest recording, to my knowledge, with Evans and Gomez. So previously, it might have been, like a Simple Matter of Conviction or something like that. But the existence of this particular recording being released for the first time now makes it the earliest that these two were actually together. And Gomez actually stayed with Evans towards, I think, close to the end of his life. So I think that Gomez broke away somewhere around 1977. So Evans had a couple of recordings there at the end of his life that didn't include Gomez, but otherwise he was there for quite a while. As far as the drummer goes, Joe Hunt, he had gotten his start with George Russell in kind of the early 60s, I want to say. So he was playing on some of the Decca and Riverside recordings with George Russell. And then he also played on that really amazing album, A Day in the City, that was a Don Friedman title that was put out on Riverside. Really, really good album. Hunt wasn't actually on any Evans recordings otherwise, I think. So I know that Hunt was touring with Evans quite a bit, and to be honest, Evans had a hard time keeping a drummer during this time period. He would sort of hire a drummer and either fire them or they would leave because they had issues playing with him. I believe that there was maybe just one other recording, but it was a live one at the Village Vanguard that Joe Hunt was featured on. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about why I think this particular album is worth your time. Even within the context of other Bill Evans Record Store Day releases. Because let's be real, there's been a bunch of them. So I believe that this is the 8th that Resonance has put out. And somewhere I saw the number 14. I think that maybe 14 is the number if you include Elemental, or maybe if you include some other releases. But bottom line is that there's been a lot of opportunities to get Bill Evans on Record Store Day. And so, why this one, right? Like, what makes this one special? And I think that there are a couple of reasons why this one stands out just a little bit. So firstly, there's a lot of music here. There's over, I think, almost an hour of music on this disc. So there's a lot of content here, perhaps compared to some of the stuff that was like a partial session or something like that. So again, a lot of material. I think another differentiator, honestly, is the date. So 1966 is pretty early and may actually be the earliest in terms of all of these sort of live sessions that they're bringing forward and putting out on Record Store Day. So if I think about some of the others, there was a bunch in 1968, 1969, 1973. They were just a little bit later. And even though, okay, what's the value of a couple of years? I think it is interesting, even just those couple of years because of who Evans was playing with and what albums he had recently put out and sort of what state of mind was he in, what was the situation from a personal standpoint. This is an interesting time for him. Also, a lot of those other Record Store Day releases were recorded abroad or internationally. So I'm thinking about the Evans title that was from England. There was a Buenos Aires one. There's Netherlands. I want to say there was Germany. So I think it's kind of interesting, again, this kind of combination of like a US date and relatively early 1966. So to the point of how this falls in Evans's catalog, if you think about it, so Evans's career, I sort of, a lot of people think about it in terms of who he was playing with, but in some ways I think about it in terms of what label was he recording for. So Evans had left Riverside in 1962, although Riverside waited until 1964 to put out How My Heart Sings. So that was sort of temporarily shelved, which I think made that album and that title track a little bit more of a current one to include. Happens to be featured twice in this. I think it's the only track that there's two versions of in this particular release. But by the time of 1966, Evans had already been recording for several years for Verve Records. He had in fact won a Grammy for one of his albums, Conversations with Myself, that came out in '63. He had recently ousted Oscar Peterson in Downbeat, the Downbeat Readers Poll in 1964 as the top piano player. But I think as a result of some of this success, he was getting a lot of criticism, both from writers as well as some of his fellow musicians, as sort of a reaction to all of his success. So I think as a result, Evans wasn't really doing quite as much studio work as he had previously. So he had recently recorded Trio 64. He would have recently recorded Trio 65 by the time of this live date in 1966. And as a result of some of these things, by the time that this was recorded, again in May of 1966, he had recently come out of the hospital, I believe. So he was hospitalized for drug abuse and malnutrition that resulted in him like missing an important date. I think he had a 2-week engagement at the Plug Nickel, and Larry Bunker left his group, and so he had to find a new drummer. And it was just a difficult time for him personally, because I think of this pressure, this pressure to succeed, and all this sort of criticism that he was receiving. So again, kind of an interesting midpoint, I suppose, or pivot point in his career. Now I will say that you can't tell, like, there's no lack of inspiration in his playing. He sounds fantastic on this album, as he always did. He always seemed to manage to play despite some of his personal challenges. Almost like a Chet Baker, kind of ability, I suppose, in that way. But in light of some of his recent albums that he had put out, it makes sense when you see the song choices that are included here. So what we have in this set is My Heart Sings, which again was a sort of relatively recently released album of his. We also have Round Midnight. We have Come Rain or Come Shine. We have the track Elsa. We have the track Who Can I Turn To? All of which were featured on the Trio 65 album, which was, I believe, the last studio album that had been released and available on the market at the time of this recording. He had some other stuff in 1965, but I believe that it was more of a like live recording dates. So from a sound quality standpoint, I wanted to address just a couple of things, because I know that whenever you have these sort of archival or live dates, always the question is going to be, how does it sound, right? Is there a lot of audience noise, or is there distortion? Was it recorded well? And fortunately, I can say that the sound is really great on this. There's great clarity of instrument. There's minimal background noise from the club. Well, I think we're all used to there being a little bit of background noise from the audience with Bill Evans recordings. So you do get, again, a little bit of room noise, but not that much audience noise, if that makes sense. So you can tell that it's a live date, and you can tell there's the sort of the sound of the room, but you don't get a lot of chatter, clinking glasses like you do in Waltz for Debbie. There is one moment of audio feedback on the track Round Midnight, but it goes away very quickly. It's actually not a problem with how they mastered it with Matthew Luthen's job. It was a issue with like a microphone or something in the room, and so my guess is it was something that they weren't able to address for this presentation. But again, it happens very briefly, and that's it. Otherwise, there's no sort of issues with the transfer. You can tell that the tape is in great shape, and I think even within the context of some of the other Record Store Day releases, I think this one sounds better than most. I don't know that it's like absolutely the best because I don't have all of them, but this one does sound better than most. It is a recording where you're not necessarily going to be paying attention to the fact that it's live. And I think that that's a good thing, right? Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I love the spontaneity and kind of feel you get from some live recordings. But at the end of the day, you want something that's going to sound really great as well, and not something that's going to sound like there's problems with the microphones or that it's going to be, compressed or tinny in sound. You don't get any of that. Like, this is a very high quality recording, and as I think that we've seen from some of the other sessions that were recorded by Jim Wilkie at the Penthouse, because this is not the first. I think Resonance has been kind of going through that catalog and putting out some of the best that was available. So one final point, I just wanted to show you the booklet because I realized I kind of neglected to. I mentioned that there's interviews with the rest of the trio as well as with Bob James, which I think is great. Zev Feldman does each of the interviews, and this booklet is fantastic. And I think one of the reasons is both the quality of the essays and interviews that are in here, but also it really feels like that club was great with capturing like all of the details of some of these musicians because the pictures in here are actually from the club. It's not like they just randomly found some Bill Evans photos and decided to feature them. We get pictures of the actual club. We get pictures of Evans, him performing there. There's a concert poster that references Bill Evans playing, and I think that like this is a great one of the trio at the club. I think it's just great to have some of this additional material that I think brings a little bit of character to the recording as you hear it. And so, I know that Resonance always does a booklet. I personally think that this is one of their better booklets. And it's also a little bit lengthier. This is 16 pages. And so, and actually here, let me just show you real quick. The one of the concert posters, it actually features Oscar Peterson, but then it says like, next week or something like that. It says Bill Evans is coming. So a lot of cool stuff, I think, like I said, that adds some interesting context. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on this one. I think, first of all, very thankful that the folks at Resonance, so George Klaben and Zev Feldman thought of me and sent along this copy so that I could check it out. Obviously, it makes my Record Store Day experience a little bit easier because I don't have to worry about trying to find this one. But I do think, for the reasons that I discussed, I do think that this one stands out a little bit more, even within the context of all of the other recordings that they've put out for Evans. A lot of content, interesting time period, a little bit earlier. And again, the first time that Gomez recorded with him. So I think there's a lot that makes this unique. I think that this is a worthwhile release. And yeah, those are some of my thoughts. So hopefully this gave you a little bit of information that helps you decide whether this is something that you're going to go after on Record Store Day. And yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. And I guess with that, I'll see you next time.